All right, so let's talk about guardrails for a little bit. So what guardrails are in your financial plan is, Bill Bengen came out with the 4% rule back in the 90s, and that's kind of a rule of thumb. But some of us, for the early part of our retirement, before we take our Social Security and whatnot, we need to go ahead and take a little bit more out. So what these guardrails are is you set your say 4%, something like that, maybe 5%, depending on your financial plan. And again, this is not financial advice. I don't know your situation, and I'm not a professional. But let's say you go ahead, the middle of the road is 4%, and you set up 6% on one side and 3% on the other. So that's kind of your guardrails. As the market fluctuates, and again, not talking about a fluctuation for a month or 6 weeks or anything like that, as the market fluctuates, you go ahead and adjust the amount you're taking out. So it could be on a yearly basis, twice a year, something like that. As long as the market returns are good, you're building up and you're taking less than 4% out. And if you get to the point where you have a big excess of money, you may want to go ahead and start drawing more out. Versus if the market takes a big downturn and you're taking out 6%, you may need to drop that back to 4% or 5%, something like that. So that's kind of what your guardrails are. So the easiest knob to turn is to reduce your spending, right? And you say that's easy? No, it's not easy because you've already set your budget. But if your budget is set up right, you'll have wants and you'll have needs. So to lower your spending, things you might look at are your travel. Are you planning on trips going to Europe this year, or, a big fishing vacation in Canada? Something like that. Well, maybe this year isn't the year that you do that. Maybe you wait until the market rebounds if we're in a downturn. Other ways of reducing spending are look at your memberships, look at your streaming subscriptions, things like that. Your auto insurance. You can change your auto insurance fairly easily to a lower deductible, or take out things like towing, rental cars, stuff like that, and see if you can lower those down a little bit. Because normally what you're going to be looking at is a 10% cut or something like that. You're not going to be looking to just slash your budget in half just because the market's in a downturn. Because remember, the 4% rule says that in a 50-50 portfolio, if you draw 4% out, that should last you 30 years. And by should means a 90% probability. So some other ways that might help you get your financial plan within those guardrails are you can take a look at Social Security. If your long-term plans like mine, I plan on deferring taking Social Security until I'm around 65, and if I can, I'm going to extend it out to 67. And that's a topic for a whole nother video about when to take Social Security, because it depends on your financial plan. But me, what I'm looking at is I'll be eligible to take my Social Security, and my wife will be eligible next year in 2025. So if we needed to, we could go ahead and take our Social Security early if we had a big downturn like we did in the early 2000s. Something that's pretty drastic. If not, I'm going to go ahead and let that Social Security gain and build up that 6% per year up to my full retirement age as long as I can. But I've talked to my financial advisor, and that's one of the things we're looking at is when we're going to take Social Security, but we're not going to lock it in yet. We're planning on 65 right now is what the plan looks like if it goes pretty well. So that could be an adjustment that you're going to make. Another adjustment is if you have brokerage accounts, if you have a large Roth IRA, you could go ahead and start drawing more out of those accounts to save taxes. Because when you take your taxes out of your traditional IRA, you're going ahead and you're going to pay, somewhere probably between 10 and 15% taxes on that. Or you may have your expenses down to where you're paying no taxes, whereas if you adjust, you could get to the point where you're paying no taxes on your dollars. You know, because you get a standard deduction. I think the standard deduction for 2024 is $29,000 for a couple like we are. So, you know, if I had a big Roth account, which I've talked about in other videos and I don't, and we went into a big downturn, I would probably start drawing some of that out a little heavier to try to lower my tax burden. That way I could live on less money being drawn out. So that's another way, is adjust how you're doing your withdrawals and out of which accounts you're taking them out of. Another somewhat painless method to lower your costs or lower what you're drawing out, going back to the 4% rule, because the 4% rule says that you can adjust for inflation every year. So you start out at 4%, and then you may need to jump up 1% or 2% every year, basically kind of like the COLA with Social Security, and you adjust for inflation. Well, in a bad market, maybe you want to go ahead and not take that inflation raise. Don't give the raise to yourself that year. You know, or wait and see, maybe sometime during the year you can give yourself that inflationary raise. That's another way to kind of curb things in a downturn. The other way is, and I know we're retired, right? We don't want to go back to work, but that's a possibility. Getting a part-time job, starting a side hustle, becoming a YouTuber. Although YouTube takes a while. It's going to take probably a year or so for this channel to even become monetized. So we're not going to count on any money out of this channel the first year or two. All right, so I hope this video's helped you into understanding what guardrails are. And if you don't need the guardrails, you know, that's great. That really is. But if you're like me and you have moderate income in retirement, you may want to take a look at these guardrails and talk to your financial advisor, or in the new retirement software, it kind of helps you set those up a little bit because you can run different scenarios. So again, I would suggest at a minimum looking at the new retirement software and interviewing 2 financial advisors. I hope this video, whoa, bird hit. I hope this video's helped you, and I hope to see you on the next one, which is right up here.